Have you ever like felt that thing, when you're talking with someone and they have totally different political views? It's like, are we even speaking the same language?
Oh, yeah. Totally.
That's kind of what we're diving into today. Political polarization.
Yeah.
We found this really interesting article called, hold on, let me get it right. Breaking the Cycle of Political Polarization. Paths to Unity.
Right.
By Allison Rowe 569 at gmail.com. And it's on roamingaround.com.
Okay.
Published April 3rd, 2025.
Pretty recent.
Yeah. So think of this like your shortcut, okay? To understanding these really deep divides, how they got there. And maybe, just maybe, some glimmers of hope on, how to bridge them.
Yeah.
And it's all based on what this article kind of lays out, right?
Absolutely. And this article, it gives us a really great framework for understanding this huge challenge, which I think it's impacting, almost everyone. And what makes it so useful is it doesn't just stop at here's the problem. It's like here's the problem, but also here's how we think about it, where it comes from, and maybe, just maybe, here's how we move forward.
Right. And that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to distill that, all that research, all that thinking.
Yeah, try to boil it down.
Make it easy.
Exactly.
So, okay, let's just jump right in. When we say political polarization, what does that actually mean? Like in real life?
Yeah, so basically at its core, it's this widening gap, this ideological gap between, political parties, obviously, and the people who support them.
Right.
But what's interesting is, and I think, the article points this out, it's more than just like disagreeing on specific policies.
Okay.
It's almost like these differences become more intense and they become much more rigid, making it really hard for people with these opposing viewpoints to even find any kind of common ground or even to have a conversation that's productive.
It's like they're not just disagreeing.
Right. It's not a healthy debate.
Yeah, it's more fundamental than that.
Yeah, it's like the distance on a compass, between 2 points is just constantly increasing.
So it's not just, I see your point, but I disagree. It's like, I don't even see your point.
Exactly. It's like your point is not even valid.
So, okay, the article talks about this in terms of beliefs and values and policy preferences. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. So what the article highlights is that this polarization shows up as these really distinct and often very opposing like sets of beliefs, values, and then, as you said, what people think the government should actually be doing.
Right.
And when these differences become so deeply entrenched, well, the space for compromise, that space for actually working together, across party lines, it shrinks.
Vanishes.
And that's what leads to tension. I mean, we see it everywhere, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it feels pretty real, right?
Yeah.
This is not just like the theoretical thing. This is affecting people's lives.
It's it.
So, okay, let's talk about what fuels it, because it's not like it's not like one day we woke up and everything was polarized. The article talks about multifaceted causes, right? Like a lot of ingredients going into this. What are some of the key ones?
Right. So the article really highlights two, I think, really powerful forces.
Okay.
So first, we all think about social media, the internet.
Sure.
On the one hand, they connect us globally, but what's interesting, the article points out, is they also create these really personalized echo chambers. So think about it like your social media feed. It's like this curated news channel, right?
Yeah.
But it's mostly showing you opinions that you already agree with.
Right.
Because the algorithms are sort of designed to feed you what they think you want.
It's almost like they're designed to be addictive. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And so what happens is that dissenting voices or different perspectives, they just get filtered out. So you're not even exposed to them.
It's so weird because like the phone is just agreeing with me all the time.
Precisely. Right. And so it just reinforces your existing beliefs.
Yeah. It's wild.
And then the second big factor that the article talks about is demographics.
Okay.
So we have these, changes in where people live, urbanization.
Right.
And then we have shifts in, racial and educational makeup of the population. And what's happening is that these things are increasingly lining up with political affiliations.
So you're saying like where you live or your background?
Yeah, your social identity.
Yeah.
That becomes more closely tied to your political identity.
So it's not just about ideas, it's about who I am.
Exactly. And so then it becomes much more personal.
Yeah.
And the disagreements feel much more deeply rooted.
Oh, yeah, because if someone attacks my idea, it's like they're attacking me.
Right, exactly. It's not just an intellectual debate anymore.
And that's what the article is saying. This is the key point, that it's like who we are is becoming our politics.
Right. It's part of our identity.
So Okay, let's kind of zoom out for a minute and
Mm.
talk about the bigger picture. What are the effects of this?
Okay.
Like, what happens when society gets this polarized? I mean, the article talks about, real-world consequences. What what are some of those?
Right. So one thing it talks about, and I think this is a big one, is that people can actually become disillusioned with
Yes.
the political process.
Like, what's the point?
Right. It's like my voice doesn't matter.
My vote doesn't count.
Exactly. And so then there's this erosion of trust.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Because when people feel like the system's not working for them or that their views are being ignored because of this polarization, they start to lose faith
Yeah.
in our institutions.
Like government.
Yeah, the justice system, the
The
media.
whole thing. Yeah.
And so that can have really big ripple effects.
Makes it harder to solve problems together.
Right, because you don't even trust the people who are supposed to be solving them.
Right. And then there's the practical stuff,
Yeah.
like Congress passing laws.
Yes, the actual functioning of government.
Like, can anything get done?
And that's exactly what the article highlights.
Yeah.
This inability to bridge the divides, it makes it so much harder to actually make progress on any kind of critical issue.
It feels like we're always talking about the same things, but nothing changes.
That's a good point. It's like a hamster wheel. So think about these big challenges, right? Like climate change, healthcare, infrastructure.
Yeah.
These are all things that require broad agreement. But polarization acts as this huge roadblock to finding solutions.
So it's not just that it's hard to agree, it's that the system itself is kind of grinding to a halt.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about what it is, what causes it, what the effects are.
Right.
But this didn't just appear out of nowhere, right?
No, of course not.
Yeah.
This has been brewing for a long time.
So let's go back in time a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
Because the article talks about some, historical moments that have kind of led us to where we are.
Right.
And I think that's important context.
Absolutely. So it walks us through some key periods to show how these fault lines of division, they've kind of shifted over time.
They've always been there.
They've always been there, but they've manifested in different ways.
Okay, so where does it start?
So it starts way back with the aftermath of the Civil War.
Okay, so that's like the most fundamental division in American history.
Exactly. And the Reconstruction era was, this period of incredible tension.
Between North and South.
Yeah. And what's striking is how deeply ingrained those initial conflicts were.
And how long their impact kind of lasted.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's like the first big one. What comes next?
So then the article shifts to the Progressive era,
Okay.
which is, around the turn of the 20th century. And this was a time of, a lot of social and political reform.
It was in response to the Gilded Age. Right.
Exactly, where you had these huge inequalities.
Right.
But as the article points out, this period also created new points of division.
So even when you're trying to make things better, there's still conflict.
There's always going to be pushback. And a lot of the divisions during this time were along lines of, social class and economic interest.
Yeah. It's like, who gets to benefit from the progress?
Exactly. Who gets a seat at the table?
And then, obviously, we have to talk about the Great Depression.
Right. I mean, that fundamentally altered political loyalties.
For sure.
Because people started looking to the government in new ways.
For help.
Right, for solutions. And so the article talks about how, distinct partisan identities kind of solidified during this time.
So people started really identifying as Democrat or Republican.
Exactly. It became more entrenched.
And then, moving a little closer to our own time, the Vietnam War was a huge dividing line, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the Vietnam War era, it really polarized the nation.
Because it was such a moral issue.
Right. And people were either firmly on the pro-war side or the anti-war side.
There wasn't a lot of middle ground.
And it hardened those ideological boundaries even further.
And then, I remember this, the rise of cable news and talk radio.
Yeah. In the 80s and 90s?
Yeah, that felt like a big shift.
And the article pinpoints this period as really significant because that's when we saw media outlets start to explicitly cater to specific political viewpoints.
Right.
So it allowed people to consume news that basically already confirmed their existing biases.
Yeah, like you could just choose the channel that agreed with you.
Exactly. It's like choosing your own reality.
Right. And then, of course, you can't talk about polarization without talking about the internet.
Right. The digital revolution.
And social media.
Which the article argues has amplified these divisions in a way that we've never seen before.
Because of those algorithms.
Right. Because they prioritize engagement, which often means more extreme content.
Exactly. And that's where we are now. So, okay, the way we get our information, it's a huge part of this story.
Absolutely.
You-
And the article talks about the pivotal role of the media, both traditional and social.
Okay, let's break that down.
Okay. So the article, what it emphasizes is that there's been this dramatic shift in how we access and consume information.
Because of the internet.
Right. And one of the main consequences, as we were just discussing, is this echo chamber effect.
We've talked about that before.
Yeah, where people are surrounded by information that just confirms what they already believe.
And blocks out anything that challenges their views.
Exactly. It's like wearing blinders. You're only seeing what you want to see.
Yeah. And then social media algorithms, they make it even worse.
Right. Because they amplify that emotionally charged content, which, often isn't the most accurate.
Right. It's like the more outrageous it is, the more people will click on it.
Exactly. And that's how misinformation spreads.
And it's not just social media, right? The article talks about traditional media, too.
Absolutely. Because there's been this trend where traditional media outlets have also kind of leaned towards specific political viewpoints.
They're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
But it feels like they all do.
And it's subtle, but it shapes how they present information and how their audiences interpret events.
So you end up with these different versions of reality depending on what you watch or read.
Exactly. And then with so many people curating their own news feeds now, it's so easy to just avoid anything that might challenge your worldview.
Right. It's like you can just create your own little bubble.
Exactly. And so then you have less exposure to diverse viewpoints, and these complex political issues get simplified into these black and white narratives.
It's a little scary when you think about it.
It is,
Yeah.
because it makes it so much harder to find common ground.
Yeah. But okay, let's talk about the psychology of all this.
Okay, yeah.
Because the article goes into this, like, why do we gravitate towards these polarized viewpoints? What's happening in our brains?
Right. This is really fascinating. So the article highlights a couple of these psychological biases that play a really significant role.
Okay, tell me about them.
Okay, so the first one is called confirmation bias,
Confirmation bias.
which is this fundamental human tendency. Think about it like your brain having a preferred search engine.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Right. So it always prioritizes results that confirm what you already believe, even if those results aren't as credible.
So it's like I'm searching for something I already know.
Exactly. We naturally seek out information that aligns with our beliefs, and we tend to dismiss or ignore anything that contradicts them.
So if I think climate change is a hoax, I'm just going to keep reading articles that say that, even if they're not true.
Right. And then this selective consumption just reinforces your initial belief. It's a self-sustaining cycle.
Yeah. And the article is saying that this is a major driver of those echo chambers we were talking about.
Exactly. It's like a feedback loop.
Yeah.
And then there's another bias called groupthink,
Groupthink, yeah.
which happens when a group prioritizes consensus and harmony over actually evaluating different ideas.
It's like, don't rock the boat.
Exactly. Individuals might suppress their own doubts or differing opinions just to avoid conflict.
Because they want to belong.
Right. And so in a political context, this can lead to the reinforcement of, more extreme beliefs within a group.
Because nobody is challenging them.
Exactly. And anyone who voices dissent might face pressure to conform.
So it's not just about agreeing, it's about not wanting to be the odd one out.
Right. It stifles debate.
Makes sense. And then the article talks about something called social identity theory.
Yeah, developed by Henri Tachfel.
Okay.
And this theory suggests that a big part of how we see ourselves comes from the groups that we belong to,
Okay.
including our political party.
So it's like, I'm a Democrat, therefore I believe these things.
Right. Think about it like, how strongly people defend their favorite sports teams.
Well, even when they're losing.
Exactly. But that same us versus them feeling, it applies even more intensely to political parties.
Right, because it's about our values.
It's about who we are.
Okay.
And so this leads to, as you said, my political team versus their political team. And we tend to favor our in-group. And we can even develop negative biases towards the out-group.
So we see the other side as the enemy.
And that's what makes dialogue so difficult, because it's not just about ideas anymore. It's about defending our identity.
Yeah, that's a really powerful point.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk about the broader impacts.
Okay.
Like, what are the effects of this polarization on society as a whole and on how our government works?
So the article talks about both societal and governmental impacts, and it emphasizes that they're significant.
Yeah, it's not just an abstract debate.
No, it has real consequences. So at the governmental level, we see this breakdown in communication and collaboration.
Between the parties.
Yeah, not just among elected officials, but also between those officials and their constituents who might hold different views.
So it's like everyone's talking past each other.
Exactly. And when everyone's so entrenched in their positions, it's really hard to find any common ground.
Which leads to, we talked about this before, legislative gridlock.
Right. The article highlights how it makes it so much harder to get anything done.
Because compromise is seen as weakness.
Yeah. And important issues get stuck in limbo because the two sides just can't agree on a path forward.
And this affects our democracy, right?
Absolutely. The article talks about how voters can become less willing to even consider candidates from the opposing party, regardless of their merits.
So it's like, if they're on the other team, they're automatically wrong.
Exactly. And so elections become these battles of ideological purity.
So the moderate voices get drowned out.
Yeah, and it leads to a political landscape that's dominated by the extremes.
That doesn't sound good.
It's not. And then you add to that the fact that misinformation spreads more easily in a polarized environment.
Because people are less likely to question information that confirms their biases.
Exactly. And so then you have this erosion of trust in institutions, and it can lead to either apathy, where people just give up, or it can lead to social unrest.
Because people feel like they're not being heard.
Right. So it's a pretty sobering picture.
Mm-hmm.
But the article does offer some glimmers of hope.
Okay, tell me about those.
Yeah, so it highlights some examples of successful bipartisan initiatives.
Where people actually came together.
Right. So one significant instance is the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESA, from 2015.
Okay.
And this replaced the No Child Left Behind Act.
Right.
And what's interesting here is that this involved, extensive negotiations and compromises between both Republican and Democratic lawmakers.
It's some pretty complex issues.
Right, like standardized testing, accountability for schools, and how much flexibility states should have.
So how did they manage to agree?
Well, the shared goal, the overarching goal of improving education for all students, that seemed to be the key factor.
So they found common ground.
Exactly. Even though they might have disagreed on the specifics, they all agreed that education was important.
That's encouraging. And the article mentions another example, the First Step Act.
Yes, from 2018.
Okay.
And this brought about some significant criminal justice reform. And again, it got bipartisan support because there was this growing consensus across the political spectrum about the need for reform.
Especially in terms of rehabilitation.
Right. And reducing recidivism. So even on a seemingly contentious issue like criminal justice, they were able to find some centrist policy objectives that united them.
And is there a more recent example?
Yeah, the article points to the Climate Solutions Caucus in Congress.
Okay.
And this is a bipartisan group of representatives from both parties who are actively engaging in discussions and promoting policy solutions to address climate change.
So they're actually talking to each other.
They are, and it shows that even on a highly debated issue like climate change, you can find common ground if you focus on the shared challenge.
It's like we're all in this together.
Exactly. We all live on the same planet.
So what can we learn from these successful initiatives?
Well, the article points out that they all shared some key characteristics.
Okay.
So first, they had a clearly defined shared objective.
Goals that everyone could agree on.
Right, and they were committed to collective problem solving, not just ideological victory.
So it wasn't about winning, it was about finding solutions.
Exactly, and they were willing to engage in respectful dialogue.
So how do we apply these lessons more broadly?
Right, so the article talks about some strategies for a better future, and it focuses on promoting civic engagement and dialogue.
Okay, tell me about those.
So one key strategy is to create more community forums, specifically designed to foster open and respectful discussions.
Like town halls, but better.
Yeah, but with trained facilitators who can guide the conversation and ensure that everyone feels safe to express their views.
So it's not just a shouting match.
Right. It's about creating a structured space for genuine exchange. And another important strategy is strengthening civic education.
In schools.
Yeah, and in community centers. Because this can empower individuals with a deeper understanding of the political process and their rights and responsibilities as citizens.
But also how to engage with people who have different ideas.
Exactly. Because it's not enough to just know how government works. You also need to know how to participate in a democracy.
Man. The article also talks about encouraging respectful communication.
Right. Both online and offline.
So like being nicer on Twitter.
Basically, yeah. Because the way we talk to each other online has a real impact on our offline interactions.
It's like we forget that there's a real person behind the screen name.
Exactly. And finally, the article suggests fostering more community building initiatives.
Like what?
like local service projects or cultural events that bring people from different ideological groups together to work on shared goals.
So finding things that we can all agree on.
Right, because it's much easier to build connections based on common interests than on political differences.
And then the article also talks about education.
Yes, it specifically highlights the transformative power of education.
In addressing polarization.
Right. So first and foremost, it emphasizes developing critical thinking skills.
Teaching people how to think for themselves.
Exactly, so they can analyze information, evaluate different viewpoints, and engage in reasoned discourse.
Instead of just believing whatever they see on Facebook.
Right, and then it stresses the importance of inclusive curricula that incorporate diverse perspectives and narratives.
So exposing students to different ways of thinking.
Exactly, because that can foster a greater sense of belonging and challenge stereotypes.
It's like expanding their worldview.
Right, and finally, it highlights the value of programs that promote empathy and understanding.
Like what?
Like conflict resolution workshops or community service learning opportunities, or even just facilitated dialogue circles.
Where people can talk to each other in a safe space.
Exactly, and build relationships across differences.
That sounds really important.
Okay.
So, okay, the article ends with a vision of unity.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
So the article expresses optimism, especially about younger generations,
Okay.
because they often demonstrate more progressive and inclusive viewpoints.
It's like they're more open-minded.
Yeah, and they're more committed to community engagement.
And they're also better at using technology in a way that can challenge those divisive narratives.
Right, they're digital natives.
So there's hope for the future.
There is. And the article also points to evolving public attitudes.
Like people are starting to realize that we're all in this together.
Exactly. We have shared human experiences and common challenges, regardless of our political affiliation.
So what do we need to do to move forward?
Well, the article emphasizes that it's going to require ongoing collaborative efforts.
Between the parties.
Right. And a commitment to bipartisan cooperation.
So we need to find those shared values and goals.
Exactly. And we need to cultivate a culture of active listening, critical thinking, and constructive debate.
A lot of work.
It is. But the article's message is ultimately hopeful.
Okay, good.
It's saying that a future characterized by greater unity and collective progress is possible.
If we're willing to put in the effort.
Exactly.
So just to summarize, we've explored what political polarization is, what causes it, its impacts, and some historical context.
Right.
We've talked about the role of the media, the psychology of polarization, and some successful examples of bipartisan cooperation.
Yeah.
And we've discussed some strategies for fostering greater civic engagement, dialogue, and the importance of education.
It's been a really interesting conversation.
It has. What resonated most with you?
I think for me, it was realizing how much these psychological biases influence our views.
Yeah.
Like that idea of our brains having a preferred search engine, it really made me think about how I consume information.
Me too. It's like we're not always as rational as we think we are.
Exactly.
So for our final thought for you, the listener, think about those historical moments where seemingly insurmountable divides were overcome.
Right.
What single step, if widely adopted, could have the most impact on bridging our current political divide?
That's a great question.
And what would be the biggest hurdle in getting that step widely adopted?
It's definitely something to ponder.
And maybe take a look at the related posts mentioned in the original article. The critical importance of recognizing women in politics today and amplifying Black voices, the power in political strategies for the future.
Those offer some really interesting perspectives on political engagement and representation.
Which are definitely relevant to this whole issue of polarization.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into political polarization.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.